The time has come to discuss the topic of the Masonic conspiracy. From a historical perspective, especially in childhood or early youth, many encounter myths and mysteries surrounding places such as the Tsaritsino estate, whose construction was initiated for Catherine the Great. This place, left unfinished over time, became the source of many legends. There is a version that the architect Vasily Bazhanov, who constructed Tsaritsino, was a Mason and used various Masonic symbols in the estate's architecture, such as the compass and the all-seeing eye. It is believed that upon inspecting the estate, Catherine the Great noticed these symbols, which allegedly led to the cessation of construction. However, historians believe that the actual reason was a reduction in financial means and personal reflections of Catherine linked to this place. Despite this, the Masonic symbols supposedly left by Bazhanov continued to provoke interest. Similar symbols are found in other places, such as St. Petersburg, which fuels interest in Freemasonry as a phenomenon and the possible secret meanings embedded in architecture. It is necessary to examine in more detail who the Freemasons are, what role they play in history, what is implied by the Masonic conspiracy, and what information is available to modern researchers regarding this. Therefore, today, we will discuss the Freemasons. In legal language, Freemasons are a closed-type society where only initiated individuals are admitted. They have their own code of honor, rules, regulations for meetings, rituals, and so on. History tells us that Freemasons are a religious political movement that emerged in modern times as a secret international organization with mystical rites, aiming for moral perfection. In essence, Freemasons gathered in their Masonic lodges and spoke about philosophy, the structure of the world, how to know oneself, and how to know God. It is a kind of philosophical circle. The Freemasons themselves, however, speak of themselves in various ways. For instance, the Grand Orient of France, as the French Masonic Lodge is called, describes itself as a philanthropic, philosophical, and progressive institution. Its goal is the search for truth, the study of morality, and the practice of solidarity. This all sounds vague, this search for truth, solidarity. It is unclear what these people do and why they gather. The United Grand Lodge of England describes itself as the largest non-religious, non-political, fraternal and charitable club. Indeed, this lodge raises a lot of money for charity, and Freemasons, in principle, have often been and continue to be engaged in charitable activities to this day. The origins of Freemasonry can be traced through the narratives of the Masons themselves, who claim that their history extends almost as far back as Adam, suggesting an ancient system of beliefs and a special relationship among the initiated individuals versed in philosophy and the divine order of the world. According to them, their timeline nearly begins with Adam. There exists a myth about the builder Hiram, who, if not the first, considering Adam as the first, would then be the second. He was the first builder responsible for constructing the famous Temple of King Solomon. Hiram had 3 apprentices who, at one point eager to ascend to the rank of master, sought to extract from him the secrets of temple building, possibly even the secrets of the universe or some secret words. However, Hiram revealed nothing to them, and ultimately they killed him in the temple. How was he killed? One apprentice injured him with a compass, prompting Hiram to flee towards one of the temple's exits, where the second apprentice stood and stabbed him with a sharp-edged square. Bleeding profusely, Hiram then dashed to the third door leading outside from King Solomon's temple. There, the third apprentice struck him on the head with a wooden mallet, killing him. Since then, the mallet, compass, and square have become symbols of Freemasonry. These tools are interpreted differently. The compass is considered a magical object that measures the boundaries of one's understanding and proximity to the Lord. The square also plays a crucial role. While each lodge interprets these symbols differently, they remain integral symbols of Freemasonry. After murdering their master, the apprentices naturally worried about being caught, so they buried him far away, making his body difficult to find. Later, King Solomon tasked finding Hiram's body, and it was discovered by the acacia branch planted on his grave. Since then, the acacia branch has also become a Masonic symbol. This is the legend of Freemasonry's origins. The term Freemason itself means freestone mason. Where did this come from? As you know, Gothic cathedrals in the Middle Ages took not years but decades, sometimes even centuries, to build. During the construction of such a cathedral, builders needed a place to live, leading them to settle near the site and form guild fraternities. In the Middle Ages, there was a system of guilds. One would focus on jewellery, another on smithing, a third on tanning, and this group comprised builders. Thus, the roots of Freestone Mason or Freemason can be traced back to a guild. The matter is rather simple. Builders gathered, exchanged some secrets of their crafts, news. They had a clear professional society, quite closed off from other communities, and thus everything developed. There was no talk of philosophy or Kabbalistic teachings. It was at this point a guild fraternity. Later, other people began to join. There were no charters or rituals yet, just people united by a common cause, gathering, so to speak, on Sundays. People from entirely different trades started to join, merchants, some officials, those adjacent to the profession. And everything began to change, because the closed club could not possibly discuss construction from dawn till dusk. It became evident that people began to discuss business, politics, societal structures, the church, and their relations with God. And thus gradually this narrowly professional society transformed into a sort of philosophical circle. Most historians and the majority of Masons will tell you that the beginning of modern Freemasonry is June 24th, 1717, on St. John the Baptist's Day. 4 London lodges met at the Goose and Gridiron Tavern to form the first Grand Lodge of London and Westminster. The 18th century was the zenith of Freemasonry. How is Freemasonry structured? At present, Masonic lodges differ from one another in rituals, number of degrees, ceremonies, charters, and so forth. We attempted to combine everything found in the accompanying literature to produce a sort of extract. So, what is a lodge? The word lodge is of medieval origin, deriving from the word shelter or cabin. It was a structure near a construction site where workers would rest, store their tools, and gather at midday. Today, the word lodge is used in the hotel and tourism context, describing hunting cabins or elite hotels, but in Masonic tradition, a lodge is an association with a distinctive name, unique number, and indication of the East, meaning the lodge's location. Meetings take place in Masonic temples, which of course now are no longer temples in the conventional sense of the word, although if you look at the Grand Lodge of England, it is indeed a temple-type building. In fact, several lodges could use the same place or the same temple to gather. A Masonic house is, accordingly, a building where several lodges meet. It contains various rooms where different lodges can gather. The first lodges bore the names of taverns where, in fact, Freemasons held their meetings, such as the Crown, the Apple, the Goose and Gridiron, mentioned earlier, and the Grapes Cluster. Today, according to various sources, there are 30,000 lodges around the world, which means it's quite a large organization. Different estimates suggest there are 10 million Freemasons across the entire planet. It must be noted immediately that the Masonic organization has no central authority, no Masonic Pope, and no Supreme Mason either. All lodges operate independently of each other and are only subordinate to their own senior officials, whom they elect. Consequently, discussing a worldwide Masonic conspiracy from this perspective is meaningless, as Masons are fragmented. If you look at the Grand Lodge of Russia and the Grand Lodge of England, they undoubtedly interact with each other, but one does not subordinate to the other. Members of a Masonic lodge call themselves brothers, and Freemasonry is divided into several categories within its structure. There are 2 main systems. The first is called the Swedish system, proposed in the 1750s by the Swede Carl Friedrich Eklef. It consists of the following. According to this system, a new member is required to adhere to the Christian faith. This is also crucial when discussing a Masonic conspiracy, as in the 19th and 20th centuries, there arose the notion that Masons worship Satan and are atheists. However, the fundamental condition for acceptance into the Masons, according to the Swedish system, is adherence to the Christian faith. In the English system, adherence to any faith is sufficient. Attitudes towards various religions have changed over time. Initially, for example, Muslims, women and people of color other than white were not admitted into the Masons. If you visit the website of the Grand Lodge of England now, you will find black individuals, Muslims, representatives from India, anyone. Thus, over time, Freemasonry, as a flexible institution, transforms. According to the English system, which is essentially the main one for all Freemasonry, it suffices for a person wishing to join Freemasonry to acknowledge their adherence to a particular religion. Thus, this organization is effectively closed to people who believe in God. There is no atheism there, no initial Satanism. In the English system, there are only 3 degrees of seniority: apprentice, fellowcraft, and master. In the Swedish system, there are 11 such degrees. There are lodges with even more complex systems, and we will later discuss what happened in the 18th century, where even more convoluted systems existed. According to the Swedish system, the Grand Master is endowed with the 11th degree and is briefly referred to as V star E star V star, translating from Latin as the deputy of the most wise Solomon, the same Solomon for whom Hiram built the temple. The 3 dots are also symbolism interpreted by the Masons themselves as the union of opposites in higher harmony. Freemasons generally speak in a convoluted manner, and everything there is based on symbols and secret signs. The workshops of the first 3 initiatory degrees, apprentice, fellowcraft, and Mason Master, are called craft or, alternatively, blue lodges. Degrees are the foundation of Freemasonry. Membership in other Masonic organizations, such as the York Rite or Scottish Rite, requires obtaining the degree of Master Mason and continuing membership in the Blue Lodge. Some Masons may receive degrees up to the 32nd degree, for example, according to the Scottish Rite. What does a degree entail? With each degree you become more enlightened, meaning you are an initiated person. And on the very last levels, you even know the secret name of God. That is to say, everything, as you see, is steeped in deep philosophy, with alchemy and similar subjects added subsequently. Listen, human beings tend to gather in groups. There are football fans, music fans, reenactment clubs, societies associated with universities, and secret societies. Humans are always drawn to something of the sort, and in this case it can't even be mentioned to anyone else. Therefore, of course, there is always that dense veil of mystery surrounding Freemasons. This mystery naturally leads to suspicions that Freemasons secretly control everything here. What else characterizes Freemasonry? Well, first and foremost, symbolism. What are the most commonly encountered Masonic symbols? For instance, if you see something like this with the sun and the all-seeing eye, as seen on the Kazan Cathedral in St. Petersburg, it is unmistakably a Masonic symbol. The square and plum are symbols that Masons interpret as the equality of social strata. The level is a symbol of justice, the compass is a symbol of community. The square can mean conscience according to some Masonic interpretations. A rough stone represents unrefined morals, a cubical stone represents refined morals. The gavel is a symbol of authority. The trowel symbolizes leniency towards human weakness and strictness towards oneself. The acacia branch symbolizes immortality. You may recall it being planted on the master's grave. The coffin, skull, and bones signify contempt for death and mourning for the extinction of truth. The Masonic round hat symbolizes liberty. A naked sword represents the punitive law, while the dagger symbolizes the preference for death. Masonic seals include several emblems, the most common being a circle containing 2 interlocking equilateral triangles, one pointing upwards and the other downwards. This is the grand seal of the order, though there are simpler seals such as the 6-pointed star, and of course the secret signs such as the Masonic handshake. When you greet someone and touch their hand with your thumb, rings, signet rings of the Masons, so that Masons recognize each other, secret words, passwords, so a person enters a room, hears the word password and understands there is a Mason present. And the gesture hand inside the coat, it means the person has undergone the Masonic ceremony and wholeheartedly accepted Masonic oaths. This traces back to the Bible, and he said to him, "Put your hand into your bosom." And he put his hand into his bosom, and when he took it out, his hand was leprous, as white as snow. Then he said, "Put your hand back into your bosom." And he took it out of his bosom, and it was restored like the rest of his flesh. In biblical verses, the heart, meaning bosom, symbolizes the person himself, his essence. If you look, you will see that Napoleon is very often depicted this way in portraits. Kutuzov, Kerensky, the man who led the provisional government in 1917, they were all Masons. Kutuzov was a Mason, Kerensky was a Mason, Napoleon was very close to the Masons, and this is undoubtedly a Masonic sign. Honestly, Stalin also liked to do this, but we honestly do not believe that Stalin was a Mason. Nonetheless, this is considered one of the main Masonic symbols. Thus, the flourishing of Freemasonry is the 18th century. Here, for the first time, the legend not only of Solomon's Temple, but also that the Masons are nothing more than a new iteration of two old orders begins to emerge. The first order is the Templar order. The Templars absorbed the wisdom of the East during the Crusades, mystical secrets of Judaism. They learned to turn lead into gold and so on and so forth. Then Philip the Fair, as you already know, defeated these Templars. Some of them fled to Portugal, a significant part fled to Scotland. And there's the Scottish rite of Freemasonry, which according to legend comes from the Templars, who passed their knowledge further. The second story is about the German Rosicrucian order. Some Templars again fled to Germany, where they passed down their knowledge through generations, and thus Rosicrucians with their treatises carry this secret philosophical knowledge. Over time, the ideas of the Templars and Rosicrucians united in Freemasonry, which gave the Masons the opportunity to build their history as ancient, giving it weight and depth. In this way, Masons claimed that their society was not just a circle of free-thinking intellectuals, but an organization rooted in the distant past. What happens in the 18th century? It is the Age of Enlightenment. These are the great philosophers. Look, Montesquieu, Voltaire, Jefferson, Locke. These are the people who begin, well, not to make history yet, but in any case, to influence it very strongly. It is they who actually prepare the French Revolution with their works, and most of them are Masons, or people close to the Masons. And here Freemasonry becomes fashionable. The elite comes to Freemasonry. Let us immediately stipulate that anyone can join the Masons, but it is an elite movement. And certainly, where does this conspiracy theory come from? Because businessmen come to the Masons, politicians come, people who are close to royal personages come? Well, obviously, when you sit in a secret club of the initiated, here is the intellectual elite, here is Voltaire, here is some sort of prince of blood, here are some rich merchants. Clearly you begin to talk about politics, begin to talk about business in addition to self-improvement and philosophy. Therefore, all the talk that, well, Masons are such harmless philosophers, intellectuals, they really mostly thought about God. Of course not. Naturally, when there's a closed society, discussions about state structure begin. There are some narrow-focused things, lobbying, career advancement. These are quite harmless matters. But obviously, when the king is informed that his heir has joined a Masonic lodge, and it's unclear what they're discussing there, perhaps they are starting a coup. And these rumors about the Masons start to swirl, begin to surround them with such a mystical veil. Dangerous for the state, because surely something is wrong there. Possibly, people are planning a coup, and in principle the Great French Revolution greatly contributes to this in France. We will get to it a little later. The Masons will be accused of preparing revolutions across Europe, to execute all the czars and all the kings on the scaffold, and change all the state structures throughout the world. At this very moment, besides the great philosophers of the Enlightenment era, a range of other characters appear in Freemasonry. One of them is Martinez de Pasquale, who did not so much rethink Masonic rites as greatly complicated them, and he created an order called the Elos Cohens of the universe. Who is Cohen? Cohen is a caste of priests in Judaism. De Pasquale greatly complicates Freemasonry. At some point, the Knight Masons practically become a parallel order, complicating the initiation procedure. At the highest levels of Freemasonry, people are reading Psalms for 6 hours, and one of the well-known mystics of that time and philosophers of that era, Saint Martin, who nearly perished during the French Revolution, meets with de Pasquale. They are in very close contact at one point, and Saint Martin even once asked him, "Is it necessary to read Psalms for 6 hours to know our Lord? Is that an essential condition?" To which de Pasquale replied, "This condition, of course, is not mandatory, but I haven't anything else to offer you." Everything begins to delve into alchemy, into secret rituals, Again, there are talks about the philosopher's stone. All of this is incredibly fashionable. De Pasquale establishes lodges in Bordeaux, Montpellier and Paris, super-closed clubs with several degrees, which forms a superstructure over the Masonic movement. And again, there are representatives of the elite. Again, rumours that the arbiters of fate gather here. These people run the state. Everyone wants to get in. De Pasquale dies, but with his appearance in Freemasonry, much mysticism, alchemy and the like appear. Another Mason whom you undoubtedly know, his name is Giuseppe Balsamo, but you know him as Count Cagliostro. And there is even a Soviet film where Count Cagliostro is one of the main characters. Who is Cagliostro? Also a figure of mysticism, a magician, philosopher, seer. He is an ordinary charlatan. Although in reality he was quite an extraordinary charlatan. The man was born in Italy, his name was Giuseppe Balsamo, and at some point he realized that honest labor would not, of course, lead to the accumulation of stone mansions, and he began to forge documents, sell fake gemstones, and then he married a very beautiful woman named Lorenza. Balsamo's aunt dies, and he takes her surname, which is much more euphonious, Cagliostro, and somewhere along the way he adopts a count's title for himself. Obviously he was not any kind of count. In Italy of the 18th century there was, to put it mildly, disorder, a fragmented country, so one could draw as many titles for oneself as desired. He, along with his wife, departs for London, or rather flees because he was caught counterfeit coining and was nearly put on trial. There he attempts small frauds and even ends up in debtor's prison. His wife arranged with a local priest, and he was released from prison. His relationship with his wife was, to put it mildly, not good. That is to say, it is thought that he corrupted her, practically hiring her out to important people to gain proximity to them. At the end of his life, she testified against him in court. Cagliostro flees to France and after some time returns to England as the great magician Count Cagliostro. He guesses the numbers on lottery tickets, heals people, tells everyone that he has lived for 300 or 500 years and has seen the pyramids of Egypt, makes his servants lie that they have served him for 400 years. He is immortal, covered in rings with enormous stones that he himself fabricates, and he gives them all away, saying, "This trinket is worth only half of London." It is clear that all of this is fake, but nevertheless he earns some money, and most importantly, he earns a reputation. With this reputation, he travels across Europe, France, Poland, Courland and St. Petersburg. In St. Petersburg, during the times of Catherine the Great, he is received quite well. Already arriving with enormous fame, Catherine favours him because Potemkin favours him, then a lover of Catherine the Great. And why does Potemkin favour him? Because he starts a relationship with Cagliostro's wife, Lorenza, and showers them with jewels. And Cagliostro does two things. Firstly, it is a historical myth, but many write about it, that he told Potemkin, "Your Serenity, I will now show you magic. Give me a bag of gold and I will triple it and take a third of the tripled amount for myself." And indeed, he does something. The amount of gold increases. He takes a third for himself. We do not know how he performed this, possibly took a third of the real gold and returned some forgery to Potemkin. Everyone is delighted. He foretells the future. He tells Catherine the Great's fortune that she will be the greatest Tsarina in the history of Russia, which was no lie, as it turned out this way indeed. Then he makes a mistake. He heals a deceased infant, and the family whose infant had died is completely overjoyed, shedding tears, unsure how to thank Cagliostro. At some point, the midwives realize that it's a substitution. He replaced the dead infant with a live one. This is reported to Potemkin. And here, according to legend, the story reaches Empress Catherine the Great that Cagliostro's wife has relations with Potemkin, and Cagliostro is expelled from Russia. Moreover, at the same time, a document from the Spanish ambassador arrives, revealing that Cagliostro lied about serving in the Spanish army, and so on. In short, Cagliostro flees. In France, he was implicated in the affair of the Queen's necklace, which was allegedly being prepared for Marie Antoinette. Ultimately, he ends his days poorly. After a series of accusations, he is imprisoned in Italy, where the cells were arranged to eliminate the possibility of escape, and his wife testified against him. It is believed that both died in captivity. According to legend, he did not die a natural death, but was poisoned. In his activities, he consistently presented himself as a Freemason and mentioned being initiated first into the English, then the French Lodge, demonstrating his connection to Freemasonry. This story illustrates that figures prone to intrigue and deceit often emerge around themes of mystery and mysticism. But let's return to Russia. Generally, Freemasons appeared in Russia, according to legend, during the time of Peter the Great, and supposedly Peter the Great was the very first Freemason. When he went to Europe to learn crafts, he was allegedly initiated into the Freemasons, with no less than the greatest English architect, Wren, personally initiating him. This is, of course, a legend, lacking confirmation, but nonetheless, these Freemasons appeared during Peter the Great's time. Then, under Anna Ioannovna, this begins to solidify, and under Catherine too it indeed flourishes, as nobles such as Ivan Yelagin, for example, head the Russian Masonic Lodge, and initially Catherine favours them. By 1787 there were 145 Masonic lodges in Russia, which is honestly a great number. They are found not only in St. Petersburg and Moscow, but in the army, the navy and the provinces, creating a rather extensive Masonic network. The two main centres are St. Petersburg and Moscow. Initially, Catherine is indulgent towards this. Under the leadership of Yelagin, who headed one of the lodges, the Freemasons gathered to discuss philosophical treatises. At this time, the Empress herself also showed interest in philosophy, corresponded with Voltaire, studied the works of Montesquieu, and such gatherings seemed harmless to her. These meetings were seen as part of a general interest in philosophy and intellectual development, which fully matched the spirit of the era. The first alarming signal for Catherine, too, was sounded when she was informed that the heir, Paul, was a Freemason. This raised concern. It was unclear what ideas were being instilled in him by the Freemasons, and what consequences this might have, given the possibility of a palace coup. Catherine remembered her own accession to power with the help of the Guard and understood that under certain circumstances, Paul might repeat a similar feat. Nonetheless, Russian Freemasonry always emphasized its loyalty to the sovereign and the motherland, considering fidelity to these principles above Masonic ideals and obligations, which became a distinctive feature of Russian Freemasonry. When Catherine the Great began to suspect the Masons of disloyalty, she summoned Yelagin and other lodge members to discuss their views. The Masons assured her that their oath was primarily addressed to the true Russian sovereign. This statement sparked tension, as Catherine perceived it as a potential allusion to her late husband, Peter III, whom some might consider the true ruler. As a result of these suspicions, Catherine initiated persecution against the Masons. At the same time, stories flared up around Bazhenov, who adorned Tsaritsino with Masonic symbols, and Novikov, a well-known Mason, which only heightened her distrust. Novikov, a man who was a Russian enlightener, a philosopher with a printing house in Moscow, engaged in philanthropy and built stone houses for peasants. At the beginning of her reign, he had a light satirical exchange with the Empress, but by the end of her reign, he was accused of something akin to a state coup. The Moscow Governor-General summoned him and said, "You print Masonic literature, do you not? You correspond with French Masons, do you not? And here I found a cipher." He shows the book's table of contents. There are many similar horrible moments which may seem amusing, yet they are catastrophic. Novikov, already an old man, was dragged into a hussar squad, taken to Schlisselburg, and even the court's conclusions sounded in the vein of, "We proved nothing, but we know he was engaged in something terrible, so let him remain in Schlisselburg." However, later, Paul then released Novikov on the very first day of his reign. In general, Catherine began the persecution of Masons, and the success of the French Revolution also played a role, as it became clear that her former friends, Voltaire and Montesquieu, the freethinkers, had prepared the French Revolution. Marie Antoinette was executed, the king was executed, and suddenly all these Masonic circles started being eradicated. There were no repressions as such, Catherine the Great rather strongly advised the Russian elite to cease their involvement with Freemasonry, warning that such activities might lead to undesirable consequences. As a result, Freemasonry in Russia did not disappear but became more concealed, and the number of lodges decreased. Nevertheless, Catherine went down in history as the first ruler of Russia to take a decisive stand against the Masonic movement. Let us return to France for a moment. The Great French Revolution was prepared by the great enlighteners, and when the massacre in Paris begins, European monarchs watch in horror, and there is talk of these Freemasons, a French term for the Masons, these very individuals who prepared the revolution. They convened in secret circles all over Europe. The same would happen in Austria, Germany, Italy, Russia. Everywhere this worldwide Masonic revolution would aim to overthrow legitimate monarchs and enthrone Masons and their cohorts. At this time, rumors of a worldwide Masonic conspiracy begin to circulate because across the ocean there are Americans, with George Washington being the most famous Mason. And can you imagine? They've infiltrated everywhere, these Masons. In essence, the French Revolution is one of the peak points when Masons are spoken of as dreadful conspirators who have just brought down the French dynasty. After the Great French Revolution, as you know, Napoleon Bonaparte emerges in France after some time. Many consider him a Mason, others do not, but see him as a man close to Masonry, and all of his brothers were definitely Masons. What happens in Russia, observe. Catherine began to suppress the Masons, but she died, and on the throne comes Paul I, who is himself a Mason. Paul I does not reign for long. He is killed, and Alexander I ascends, who is initially very liberal and benevolent towards the Masons. Most Russian officers are Masons. Kutuzov was a Mason. He joined the Masons, as he himself said, to restrain the flesh because Kutuzov loved women, loved to wander, loved to drink, and he considered that when he joined the Masons, he would somehow subdue his flesh and think of higher things. However, until the end of his life, he remained a reveller, and Masonry did not help him in this. Some rumors suggest that Suvorov was a Mason. Thus, when the war with Napoleon begins, on one side are Masons and on the other side are Masons. There are very interesting relationships. When the Russians captured the French would show secret signs indicating they too were Masons, and these prisoners were treated differently. Alexander I, of course, knew this. Essentially, nothing happened to the Masons. They were favoured, they gathered, and so on. But closer to the 1820s, Alexander I turns towards orthodoxy. The elder Foti appears, and the Tsar's canon changes. Yet again, secret society, yet again conspiracy everywhere, and, frankly speaking, in the year 1822, Alexander I issues a decree that Masonry is banned in Russia. All Masons are to be recorded, secret societies are completely banned, they cannot assemble because there will be treason. And in general, on Senate Square among the Decembrists and around Pushkin, there will be a multitude of Freemasons, and Freemasons will also be coming out to Senate Square, and this will certainly be remembered. One of the interesting moments, is that in St. Petersburg there is the Alexandrian column or Alexandrian pillar, and on it is the all-seeing eye, a Masonic symbol which could not simply have a plaque attached to it. Nicholas, who ascended the throne after the murder of Alexander I, Tsar Nicholas I, allowed this plaque because he knew about the contribution of the Masons, Russian officers, about their enormous contribution to the victory over Napoleon. It is not by chance that this symbol is on the Alexandrian pillar. You will see these rays on the Kazan Cathedral, and you will see the eye. This is also a Masonic symbol. Kutuzov was also buried in accordance with Masonic rites. Despite being banned, they somehow exist, and the next flourishing of Masonry is in the year 1905. Masonic societies reappear, Masonic activity begins, and where there is action, there is resistance. The Black Hundreds appear, the Union of Michael the Archangel, and those Masons, the Ilus Cohens, who were an order in the 18th century. The myth that Masons became the main force that destroyed the Russian Empire long existed in the Russian nationalist movement. According to this theory, the Masons allegedly surrounded Nicholas II with spies, and then contributed to the revolution that brought down the empire. As evidence, it was often cited that Alexander Kerensky was indeed a Mason. However, this explanation is no more than a conspiratorial hypothesis. The reasons for the revolution were much more complex and multifaceted. And if only Masons were behind the fall of autocracy, it would have been just one of many, the least significant threats to the empire's stability. In the early 20th century, again the Masons appear on the scene, again with noblemen, again with industrialists, meaning the Masons have an international network with predominantly the French lodge, but also with the English one. And Masons are present in the territory of the Russian Empire, and generally nothing threatens them. In modern Russia, Freemasonry also exists. There is the Grand Lodge of Russia. Here is an overview of what it consists of. The Grand Masonic Lodge of Russia was created in 1995. It has connections with more than 100 other lodges worldwide. Initially, there were 4 Masonic lodges in Russia, 2 in Moscow and 1 each in St. Petersburg and, for some reason, in Voronezh. However, their number quickly increased. A year after the establishment of the Grand Masonic Lodge of Russia in St. Petersburg, 3 more Masonic lodges appeared in Moscow. The chairman of the Masonic Lodge was elected Georgy Dergachev, who remained in this position until 2007. Since 2007, the Master of Russian Masons has been the same person. His name is Andrei Bogdanov. He is the Chief Mason of Russia. Now about the conspiracy. What is this worldwide Masonic conspiracy? As we have already established, once the elite begins to move, secret and unknown connections immediately arise, and these myths and legends start to swirl. Somewhere they are myths, somewhere, of course, not entirely, and lobbying and pushing one's own interests and politics. A lot for the theory of a global Masonic conspiracy has been contributed by the book of the Frenchman Leo Taxil, which saw the light in the year 1890, called The Devil in the 19th Century, and there is all that awe beloved by US conspiracy theorists. Masons, like the Templars, worship Baphomet, arrange sacrifices, eat infants, drink blood, rule the world through connections with big bankers, industrialists, and politicians. The book contains the revelation of a certain Miss Diana Vaughan, who was a female Mason, but then repented and, in fact, revealed everything happening within French Freemasonry. Later, Leo Taxil himself admitted that it was all a hoax, that he invented everything, and the woman he presented under the name Diana Vaughan was not a Mason at all, but just an ordinary woman he made an agreement with. But, as you understand, conspiracy theory is something that does not require practical evidence, so smart people said, well, of course he said it was a hoax. Well, we understand they pressured him, so he had to say it on purpose, to cover up for the Masons. In general, this myth is nourished and nourished, but where there's smoke, there's fire. And there's something that hardly anyone seems to know now, but it was the biggest scandal of the 20th century related to Freemasons. Let's talk about the Masonic Lodge of Italy, known as Lodge P2, or Propaganda Due Lodge. Lodge P2 had been known since the late 19th century, and until the year 1976 it functioned as a Masonic Lodge of Italy, one of the Masonic lodges where Masons discussed philosophy, the meanings of existence, and so forth and so on. But a man appeared named Licio Gelli. By that time he was already a financier, entrepreneur, a person involved with banks, newspapers. He was a literator and even in some ways a philosopher. He is a man of an amazing fate. He was born in Italy, and in the mid-1930s he went to Spain to join the Falangist movement, Francisco Franco's movement, to fight the communists. Having defeated the communists, he returned to Italy, became a fascist, was close to Mussolini, and after the defeat of Nazi Germany, after the defeat of the fascists in Italy, he nevertheless remained within. He started to engage in the textile production, quickly grew rich, and in the year 1976, he entered the Masonic Lodge P2 and began to gain influence there, began to surround himself with important people, began to form strong and important connections, and the Grand Master of Italy at some point expelled him from the lodge. In response, Licio Gelli threatened him with compromising material. He was reinstated in the lodge, and over time Licio Gelli became the head of Lodge P2. This continues until the year 1980. At some point, either in the year 1978 or 1980, they once again have a falling out with the Grand Master, and the P2 Lodge is excluded from the Masonic movement, becoming a wild lodge. What is a wild lodge? It is a lodge that is not recognized by the main lodge of the country, the main provincial lodge. It is a wild lodge where Freemasons gather for various reasons, but no one acknowledges them. They call themselves Freemasons, yet the main movement does not consider them as such. And this P2 Lodge begins to gain wild popularity. At some point in the year 1980, Licio Gelli, already a very public figure, gives an interview. Among other things, he says, "You know, I have a very important influence within the Masons, a very strong influence. Everyone knows me. I'm quite a serious Mason." And one morning, during a completely different financial investigation, a search is conducted at his villa, and the Carabinieri find 30 notebooks. There were no computers yet containing dossiers on all P2 members. These notebooks are immediately taken to the Prime Minister of Italy, and then the horrifying revelations begin. It turns out that this lodge has around 70 branches throughout Italy. Half of the government is involved. There are bankers, intelligence officers, a deputy minister of defense. They control 4 major newspapers, 2 major publishing houses. Berlusconi and his future political associates appear there for the first time. In essence, the police unexpectedly uncover a structure that governs all of Italy. The deeper you dig, the more horrifying it becomes. Connections with the Vatican and the Vatican Bank, the famous case of money laundering through the Vatican Bank. Connections with the mafia, suspicions that Licio Gelli participated in or was somehow linked to the murder of Italian Prime Minister Aldo Moro, who was shot by the Red Brigades. This is one of the most terrible moments in Italy's history, in the history of terrorism. He was, according to the investigation, involved and was stalling the investigation of the Bologna bombing, where 200 people were injured, 80 people died, and the crime was attributed to the far-right NAR group. And it still remains unclear whether it was NR or not, because a version appears that at that moment Europe was engaged in a struggle against communism, opposing the Soviet Union. And immediately there appears a version that Licio Gelli was financed by the CIA and NATO to incite fascists to shoot communists and people close to them across Italy. In general, a wild scandal erupts, the government resigns, an investigation begins, and it essentially leads nowhere because a series of murders ensues. One of the bankers is killed in an American prison, journalists are shot, someone is poisoned, and this whole story somehow disappears. Moreover, Licio Gelli later ends up in jail for being connected with the bankruptcy of Banco Ambrosiano, and nothing further happens. He escapes to Switzerland, is caught there, bribes the guards and flees to Latin America, where again there is a connection to P2. The P2 Lodge included many Latin American dictators, and Licio Gelli possessed various passports from different countries. In general, he died in 2015 at his villa as a wealthy man at the age of 94, with nothing troubling him, and no Freemasons were condemned. Nevertheless, the P2 Lodge certainly controlled Italy's economy, was linked with the mafia, influenced politics and finances. When we speak about a Masonic conspiracy, this was a concrete conspiracy of the Masonic Society. In the end, let us talk about well-known Freemasons, whom we definitely know. Mozart was a Freemason, Giuseppe Garibaldi was a Freemason, all 4 of Napoleon's brothers were Freemasons, Kipling, the great English writer, was a Freemason, Voltaire was a Freemason. About Kerensky and Kutuzov we already mentioned, Novikov was a Freemason. Ivan Petrovich Turgenev, director of Moscow University, was known in certain circles as the creator of the first Masonic lodge in Simbirsk, named the Golden Crown, which was formed in 1784. Griboidov belonged to the largest lodge in St. Petersburg within the connection of Friends. Pyotr Chadayev joined the Freemasons in 1814, and finally Anders Breivik, the infamous mass murderer, was also a declared Mason. Who opposed the Freemasons? Hitler did not like Freemasons. He believed they were conspiring against him and viewed them clearly as enemies of the Nazi regime. Hitler ordered the execution of all known Freemasons, and during the Second World War, an estimated 200,000 Freemasons were killed. In Soviet Russia, it was clear that all secret organizations were outlawed, and there could be absolutely no Freemasons, as the Soviet authorities fought against them, although by that point there was no one left to fight. Saddam Hussein made Freemasonry illegal in 1980, believing they promoted Zionist ideas and naturally wanted to overthrow him. Only a few Muslim countries, despite presently allowing Muslim Freemasons, recognize them. These are Turkey, Morocco, Malaysia, and Lebanon. The Catholic Church is the only organization that forbids Freemasons from being its members. This is quite a paradox, isn't it? The Freemasons say, "We only accept those who believe in God," while the Catholic Church says, "We do not recognize you." This was a brief insight into the history of Freemasonry, an intriguing movement shrouded in mysticism, suspected of being a world government. Not without reason, as we have already heard, somewhere they, indeed, were quite a local government. It is obvious that one cannot tell everything in an hour, but these are the basic things we and you now know about the Freemasons.